Well, I've been feeling nostalgic this week and going down memory lane a bit. I was thinking about cookouts and remembering them in family gatherings and reunions with friends. And I remembered this family that we knew growing up on Martin Drive, and family who lived in our neighborhood, and they had children our age. And as is often the case, when children play together, then their parents get to know one another, which is what happened to our families. And occasionally this family would come to our house for a cookout, or we would go to theirs. But even as a child with the family I'm thinking of, I could sense my father, who was ordinarily very affable and extroverted, didn't enjoy get-togethers with this other family. I could just tell he didn't like getting together with them. He'd be somewhat reserved. The kids would be playing, the mothers chatting away, and there would be my dad grilling hamburgers, barely acknowledging the man. And then the couple divorced, which was kind of a rarity in our circle in those days, and the man moved away. A short time later, I overheard my parents discussing the matter and learned the husband had been unfaithful, not for the first time, and the wife had reached her limits of forgiveness and filed for divorce. The mother and children moved across town to a smaller house. The children found other kids to play with, and the father moved to an apartment in the city, and I never saw him again. Fast forward 50 years. I'm visiting my dad in his assisted living, his apartment. My mom is deceased, and I had brought the local newspaper to Dad to read to him. And we were reading the obituaries. My dad loved the obituaries. And lo and behold, here was this man. Here was his obituary. And I read it aloud to my dad, and then I asked, "You didn't care for him, did you?" And Dad said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Was it because he cheated on his wife?" "Well, that didn't help, but that wasn't the only reason." Now, as a pastor, I think it's important to help people process their feelings. So I pressed my father for details, not out of nosiness, mind you, but only in the interest of helping my father get in touch with his feelings. I said, "Why didn't you like him?" And Dad said he was selfish. He was selfish. He spent all his money on himself without ever doing anything for his wife and children. He had a responsibility for his children, and he neglected it. Now, as you're aware, I've been talking about my geezer's manifesto, the stuff I want to do before I croak. Today, I want to speak about our duty of care for those who come after us, our determination to devote our resources to their needs instead of our wants. Today we have it exactly backwards. Government spending for children has declined every year since 2010. There was a little blip there during the pandemic when we were doing direct payments to families with children, but that has ended. That, incidentally, more than any other economic event in this nation, lifted more children out of poverty than any other federal act, and we stopped it. 37% of our tax dollars go to programs for the elderly, 37%, while only 9.8% go to programs for children. This is predicted to shrink to 6% in the next decade. If the United States budget were a person, my father wouldn't talk to it. That's where we are. I received a hateful missive this past week from a man who identified himself in the first sentence as a Christian, calling me a tax-loving liberal, thinking I would be offended. I wrote back and told me he had me dead to rights. I love taxes. Now, I have at times been a very fickle lover. I'll admit that. Sometimes I don't like taxes. I especially don't like them on April 15th. But then something always happens. I always end up going uh, and visiting some place where people hate taxes and won't pay them. And I notice the same thing time and again, that when the adults don't pay, the children will. That when the adults don't pay, the children will. They pay in malnourishment, substandard schools, lack of opportunity, and unsafe housing. They pay in environmental degradation, domestic violence, and shoddy health care. You can take this to the bank. Whenever and wherever we adults hate taxes and refuse to pay them, when we bellyache and moan, and only elect politicians who promise to cut our taxes, whenever we do that, the children are the first to suffer. The first to suffer. My father's side of the family were all coal miners from southern in Illinois. They were concentrated in a little town called Valier that had one gas station and a candy store my cousin Pinky owned. And we'd go down there every July for family reunion and just loved it. All of my family lived on one street in houses in a row with these big maple and oak trees, and we'd sit on those metal chairs that when you sat on them long enough, the design from the back of the chair would imprint itself on your back. These wonderful chairs underneath the trees, and we would have foot races and the children would play. And I had a second cousin who I was in love with and wanted to marry, and my brother Glenn said we couldn't because our children would have 6 fingers. But I loved going down there. And I loved especially my great uncle Dennis, my grandfather's brother. I never knew my grandfather, my father's father. He died when I was 1. And Uncle Dennis kind of took it upon himself to serve in a grandfatherly role on our trips to Valier, Illinois. And he would tell me stories about what it was like to be a coal miner. When he first started in the 1920s, he told me that back in the old days of coal mining, back before sensors had been invented that could be pinned to the coal miner's cloth that would detect bad air, before all of that was invented, they would carry parakeets with them down into the mines. Because if the air was bad, the parakeets were the first to feel it. They were the most sensitive to any kind of bad, noxious air. They would carry them down in little cages. And he said, son, when your parakeets stop singing, that's when you know you're in trouble. You got to get out of that mine as quick as you can when your parakeet stops singing. Well, our children are today's parakeets. When they stop singing, we're in trouble. All of us. When they fall silent, we need to act. Here's a thought. Let's be good geezers. When we see the federal budget for children's programs fall from 9.8% to 6% of the federal budget, let's raise our voices. Let's stop getting worked up and angry about taxes and start getting worked up and angry about kids being hungry and unsafe and unhealthy. Let's be outraged by dilapidated schools. Let's be incensed when feeding programs for children are slashed to the bone. Joanne, you know, is a librarian in a school of 650 kids. Her school has one counselor, one, to help at-risk children. Her district has 4 counselors for 2,600 kids and 52 paid coaches. Let's be offended by that. You know what I've learned? I have learned that you can judge someone's character by what angers them. We can judge someone's character by what angers them. We have all these folks who are furious when women have the freedom to plan their families. We have all these folks who get mad that children might learn that in this nation we once enslaved black people. They're mad gay people can marry one another. But when you ask them to give a poor child a free breakfast at school, they will scream about socialism and tell us the end is near. Let's not be like them. Let's be good geezers. Let's be the best Quaker geezers we can be. This Thursday is Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving. How about, though, in addition to thinking of the things for which we are grateful, let us also give others, especially children, a reason to be grateful for us. A reason to be grateful for us. Let us not only be grateful, let us also be the reason for the gratefulness of others. Let's be good geezers. Well, as Joanne said, we went down to Kunop this past Wednesday to deliver food, Steve Kirchhoff and Bill Smith and I. And I had been in that area many times before, both at the food pantry and trips on my motorcycle, just going down there with the Quaker Outlaws on a Saturday afternoon and seeing the sights. But this past Wednesday, I looked at that area with different eyes. And have seen what I have seen time and time again in rural Indiana. These pockets of deep poverty, of faded plastic, broken toys lying in yards, of old rusty vehicles, no longer working, no longer running, of children playing among them. When we began unloading the food, Mabel Capps, who runs the center, wasn't able to be there, so her son came over and helped us, and we knew that the food center had been down for a while. And we said, what was it like when you reopened? They're now back behind the Cataract Lake General Store. And he said, we were swamped. He said, we had all this food saved up, and it disappeared. He said, people were standing in line all morning long to get food for their kids. On January 1st, in this meeting, friends, we are dedicating ourselves to making sure that not one child in that area goes hungry. We want every child in that area to be fed. On the way home, I was thinking, how did we even start up with Kunot? It's not in our county. It's not near us. There are other places much closer. And I remember we got started with Kunot because of Dave Siementel, who had such an eye for hurting people. And he's the one who brought it to our attention. He was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful man. So, November 1st, and this isn't just impetuous Phil, I've actually talked about it with the proper committees. Let's dedicate ourselves to making sure that the children of that area are fed. And we can do that. And we're going to incorporate it into our worship. We're going to pass big wicker baskets. I've already asked Jimmy McClung to help. And we're going to load those baskets up and we're going to overflow those baskets. I would love to be in a position that every Wednesday I had to drive a truckload of food down there. That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. So let's us older folks remember the younger folks. Let's do that. No telling the lives that can be saved by that gesture of goodwill. So, done preaching, just inform me. Be good geezers.